Hi, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to our November episode of Dear Sacramento. I'm Darrell Steinberg, I'm your mayor, and I'm really happy to have this opportunity to answer some of the questions that have come in. It's just one of many ways that, as your mayor, I'm trying to make sure that I'm accessible and connecting with my bosses, you, my constituents. A lot has happened in the last month and a lot of really exciting things. Of course, the big news, we officially got Major League Soccer. Not only is that a big deal for soccer fans, but for the entire city and our desire to make Sacramento an even more vibrant place. It's a big thing for our long dormant rail yards because now it's Major League Soccer, it's Kaiser, it's a $400 million civic center courthouse, going to be housing, and so much more to go. And what an exciting time. Stay tuned over the next several weeks for more news, maybe more news on soccer, certainly more news on the waterfront, and more news on our plan to create a housing trust fund that will be capitalized over time at well over $100 million. We'll end the year on a bang. Look at Sacramento, so many great things going. And yet at the same time, I know we have many challenges. And so I never rest on my laurels as your mayor. We celebrate the good stuff. And at the same time, we work on the hard stuff. Let's get to your questions. Thanks. So I'm reading the questions. The first question today comes from Roger in South Natomas. Roger asks why there are still empty buildings on J Street. He wonders why we can't get businesses to buy them. It's a great question because as the arena has been built in Doco and all the changes to the Midtown and the downtown, all the excitement, it's true that parts of J Street are the opposite of what it is we have seen and what we want. However, there is hope, because Anthem Properties has bought the stretch of empty buildings on the south side of J Street between 10th and 11th. And they have plans to build a mixed-use building, 153 apartments and 6 stories on the south side. On the north side, we've got Satiri Kolokotronis, who, of course, done so much great work in the downtown and the midtown. We're working with to deal with that vacant site as well, and hopefully to create at least that many units and similar quality development. And so J Street will not be dormant for long. There is hope, and we actually have a couple of lead developers that are in the mix and in the midst of trying to fill those holes. Everything in government and everything in government at any level takes a lot of time. And, that's often some frustration to me because I wish that we could wave the magic wand and make things happen faster, but things are happening and things will happen on J Street. Let me go to Elliot from Midtown. He asked about rent control. Kitty and Mackenzie also asked about this topic, and here's Elliot's question. Elliot is one of the people who signed in support of an amendment to the city's charter in March of 2020. He hears that I and other city council members have thus far failed to place the amendment initiative on the ballot. Why should tens of thousands of Sacramentans who support this effort not get a chance to vote on rent control, just cause, and a rent board as they were promised just because of a disagreement you're having? Great question. And you give me an opportunity to answer it forthrightly. And there's a little bit of history here. In my last year in the state Senate, I authored a bill that said when a state initiative is put on the ballot, the initiative proponent then has the ability to withdraw the initiative prior to it actually being voted on, if the initiative proponent can make a compromise agreement with the state government, with the legislature and the governor. That law was passed, and then subsequently, after I left the legislature, the same ability for an initiative proponent to withdraw their initiative at their own behest, was applied to local governments. So fast forward. It is true that thousands of people signed a rent control petition that would establish an elective rent board that would apply rent control across the board, and that would provide a pretty dramatic change when it comes to the way private property is operated and the protections afforded to tenants. I believe in reasonable rent regulation, by the way. I do think that initiative went too far. That's just my opinion, and that really doesn't answer your question. So let's fast forward. I began a process of a negotiation with the initiative proponents. My colleague, Steve Hansen, kind of took the relay baton after I started this and completed a negotiation between the business community and all of the signatories, not the thousands of people, but the proponents, the signature proponents, 3 of them, to the rent control initiative. They completed a negotiation, and it led to a very good compromise that provides a 5% rent cap for 6% rent cap for tenants, and just cause for any units bought prior to 1995. Let me complicate this a little bit more. The state legislature then passed a statewide rent control bill. The legislature did, that the governor signed, that applied the breadth of the protection to anyone who bought units or lives in units that were constructed in 2004, going backwards. And a 5% rent cap. So there are 2 issues here. Number 1, should the city ordinance get the benefit of the broader state protection in terms of the number of units covered? The answer is definitely yes. And we're working with our city attorney to make sure that in the end, and soon, that Sacramento tenants get the benefits of the greater level of protection in the state law. So that's one issue. Let's set that aside so that there isn't any doubt there. Now the question you ask, why is it that the petition to put the local rent control on the initiative on the ballot should not go forward, in my view? All 3 of the designated signatories for the rent control initiative, local rent control initiative, have agreed in different forms, 2 of them in writing, and 1 of them verbally before the city council, agreed that they would support the city compromise and that they would essentially then withdraw the initiative. And in politics, in government, in law, in society, we have to live by our words, even if after we give our word, we have a change of heart. And so the business community has lived by their word. The city council has lived by its word by working hard to actually craft a compromise. And 2 out of the 3 initiative proponents have agreed to live by their negotiated word. And the 3rd proponent, who is not agreeing formally to withdraw, agreed in front of the city council that the compromise was the right compromise. And so if we don't all live by what we promised, the system with all its imperfections kind of falls apart, because it could go the other way in the future. It could be that the business community agrees to something that the progressive, let's call it the progressive community, really wants. And if the business community were to back out at the end, after they had made an agreement, we would apply the exact same standard. So I hope all this gets worked out. I think the compromise, especially when you combine the city ordinance with the state law, provides huge protection for tenants. And that's what's most important. Everybody who lives in a unit that was built prior to 2004 is going to get just cause protection if they've lived in the unit for a year, I believe that is. And there's going to be a rent cap. That will benefit tens of thousands of people, if not millions of people in the state, and certainly tens of thousands of people in Sacramento. And finally, with regard to the initiative, you know, I understand and I respect the right of people to have their voices heard always, and they certainly have their voices heard here at City Hall. That's how we came to the compromise. But the initiative itself would be an all or nothing proposition. And I believe that the initiative actually helps spur the protection that the thousands of residents in the city of Sacramento are going to get. That is, I know, a very detailed explanation, but this is the opportunity, as if you were sitting right here in the room with me, for me to be able to explain my point of view and what I think is the right thing here in our city. Thank you. Let me move on to the next question. Brenda from River Park asked why we can't have tiny homes and community bathrooms for the homeless like we had for our farm workers years ago. This is a great question, and if you listen to NPR, read Marcus Bertone of the Sacramento Bee, and you'll be reading more in the coming days, I hope. I actually have a very clear proposal on this subject. And let me explain to you what my frustration is with affordable housing and housing for the homeless in Sacramento and in California. We are not keeping up with the need and the demand. And part of the reason is that our prototype of building affordable housing or permanent supportive housing, which is generally apartment style housing, which is good in quality, one, takes 2 to 3 to 5 years to build, and secondly, requires on average $300,000 to $400,000 of public subsidy per unit for one unit. Much higher, by the way, in the Bay Area and in Southern California. At the same time, we have what I call this nascent industry of efficiency housing. And there are a lot of different models. There's pallet homes, there's cabin communities, there are tough sheds, there's cargo units, there's tiny homes themselves. Everything in this area that I have seen, manufactured housing, that the carpenters have a facility in Vallejo that I'm going to soon go visit. All of this is nascent in the sense that none of it's been brought to scale. And why hasn't it been brought to scale? I think one reason is because all of our public housing dollars are going into the single prototype of apartment style housing that requires that huge subsidy. I propose here in Sacramento, and I think this would be a good model for the state, that as we build up our housing trust fund in Sacramento through Measure U and through our work with a lot of private entities that are also committed to affordable housing, that we set aside 30% of that money for subsidies of less than $100,000 and define the kind of efficiency housing and kind of alternative housing prototypes, tiny homes that we want to see built. And to actually try to create what I call a Silicon Valley moment around efficiency housing, whereby investing some public dollars into these new ideas, that we actually lift them and bring them to scale. Because it is the only way we're going to address the volume of need out there in Sacramento and in California, is if we focus on volume. Now, not everybody wants to live in a tiny home, but I'll tell you, if they're quality, which they should and must be, electricity, plumbing, a front door, safety, and dignity, this could meet the need of a lot of people, not only homeless people coming off the street, but what about students at Sac State that are living in their cars? What about lifestyle people? You know, not everybody wants to live in a large place, and people love the efficiency and the convenience of smaller living. We've got to do more of this, and we have plans to lead the way in Sacramento. Thank you. The next question. I get lots of questions, of course, about homelessness. It's the biggest challenge we face. And John from Howe Avenue asked why there are so many homeless people on the streets of downtown. Natalie of West Sacramento asked why there are no winter sanctuary shelters opening for the homeless this year. Victoria of South Natoma says the problem is just getting worse, even though I said it would be one of my top priorities. All fair questions. So we are trying to change the direction around homelessness in Sacramento. And you're darn right, this is one of the things I stated as a top priority. Are we making progress? Yes, we are. Is it fast enough? No, not nearly fast enough. Let me step back and explain, not excuse, because I share the frustration that more is not happening faster. When I started, the city was not in the homeless business in any way, in any appreciable way. The city had done some pilot, and we do fund some of the long-term shelter beds in the River District. Since I've become mayor, we have changed the direction. We are now committed to creating 600 or so new shelter beds that are not long-term shelter, but instead are shorter-term intensive service case management shelter beds that actually get people off the street and have the prospect to move people into permanent housing and off the streets. We opened Railroad Avenue in North Sacramento 2 years ago, and that served to get hundreds of people off the streets. It closed because it was frankly not a great facility. It was an old warehouse. We now have over 100 people sheltered on Capitol Park in the heart of downtown. And the reports from the field and the streets are that it's actually making a difference. And that some of the people who have been the longest in terms of their homelessness, who have been some of the more difficult people, frankly, for the business community to deal with, are now indoors. We have now approved and have plans to build hundreds of additional beds. Under the WX Freeway, we've approved at Alhambra the 100-bed low barrier triage facility, and the Meadowview Women and Children's facility as well. In addition, we have repurposed about 180 of those beds in the River District to make them shorter term, more intensive case management so that we can move people in and out quicker so that we open up more space and capacity. On December 3rd, we're going to be hearing proposals to quickly implement more scattered site units and to begin actually contracting to bring in some of these tiny homes and actually get them up and running. All of my colleagues who I challenged to bring forward their proposals to create at least 100 beds in their districts are coming forward with proposals. And I am moving as fast as I can, but everything takes too long. You know, even the Meadowview shelter, right? I wanted to be open by the first of the winter. Probably not going to happen. Maybe sometime before the winter ends. I don't know yet. The WX, same thing. It's taking too damn long. But we'll get up and running within the next number of months. I'm raising money. We have enough money to do what I just described and more for the next 2 to 3 years. I still believe that 6 months from now, that it's going to look and feel different because we're going to have more bed capacity. Am I open to ideas like a safe ground and outdoor living? Alan Warren has talked about that, my colleague. I'm open to it now, as long as it leads to getting people under roof. The other thing that I might add, I know this is lengthy, but appreciate detail, I hope. In chairing the governor's task force to end homelessness, I have what I think is the most controversial and provocative idea out there that's beginning to get some statewide traction. And it is this. We have to step back and recognize that in this state, we actually have a public policy that says we're okay with people living outdoors. Everything we do around homelessness around the state, at the state level and at the local level, is voluntary. It's all voluntary. We do the best we can. Well, I'm proposing that we change that reality and that we make mandatory what we know is necessary. I am calling for people to have a legal right to a roof over their head, and for the first obligation, legally enforceable obligation of government to provide that roof. Because until we make it mandatory and until we drive all of the resources on the mental health side, on the housing side, on the emergency shelter side, towards a enforceable imperative, a North Star, to first bring everyone indoors so that people with mental health and substance abuse can get the services and the help they need, until all the money is geared towards getting people indoors first, I don't think this is going to get much better statewide, despite all of our efforts. So I'm working on this on all fronts, and I understand people's impatience, but you know me well enough to know that I do not give up or give in until we can actually represent and see success. We are helping, I went and said we're going to get 2,000 people off the streets by the end of my first term. And we actually have gotten 2,000 people off the streets or more. It's just that the inflow continues as well, and we're going to keep at it. Okay. Oh, by the way, Winter Sanctuary, the county's operated, and they've decided, and I support it, that as charitable as Winter Sanctuary is and was, that with that money, we want to put it into more of a longer-term continuum of care so that we can get people into shelter, but then into permanent housing. So Araceli has lived in Natomas for 30 years. She said residents in the community are worried about the lack of schools and about traffic. She asks what the plan is for completing the East Natomas Ed Complex in Twin Rivers School District. She also wants to know when we're going to get light rail to the airport. First of all, on the light rail to the airport, it's a great vision. I fully support it. It's expensive, about $1 billion. And I know we've got a great congresswoman who's always delivering for us, and that we will get there. But in the meantime, RT is funding bus service to the airport. We've got that Electrify America grant. I want to see, as many electric vehicle shuttles to the airport as possible. And so there is going to be increased options to get to the airport while we work on the long-term plan and the vision. So on the Natomas school issue, I don't have a comprehensive answer to you, except to say that within the last year, the city of Sacramento annexed the land that the East Natomas Educational Complex in Twin Rivers is intended for. And I know Councilmember Ashby and others and our city staff were in conversation with the Twin Rivers School District. And now that we have control over the land, we are engaged with them in conversation about how to complete the school, how to take the land and complete a middle school and a high school to follow through on some of what you have asked. But more to come, and I encourage you to participate in the stakeholder and community meetings around those sets of important issues. That's what we got for today. And I look forward to seeing you out in the community. I'd encourage you to follow me and us on social media, engagesac.org, and make sure you subscribe for future editions of our show here. Make sure you use our Q&A form to have your question included. And if you have any other suggestions about how we can best connect to our constituency. And I wish everyone a very happy and safe Thanksgiving. Blessings to all of you and your families. We have much to be thankful for in Sacramento. And yet there are a lot of people hurting, and we will continue to work to make sure that Sacramento is a place that's vibrant, exciting, dynamic, and always inclusive of everyone who isn't experiencing the same opportunities that that some of us have, and that's always the mission here. Thank you very much.